As of today, the day of recording, we're 88 days into the Trump administration and MAHA. There's so many sound bites and things that are thrown into the ether, but it's hard to distill what's been done, what's the truth, what's good, what's the bad.
If MAHA is truly MAHA, but they leave out the farmers and ranchers as the cornerstone, as they've been doing, then it's not truly MAHA. The whole talk about right now with MAHA seems to be like the corporations and all of like Kellogg's, and so the focus is Red 40 and all these other additives and preservatives that you see in grocery stores. Where does all of that food come from? It comes from a farmer or rancher, and so that's why it's still missing the entire point, but it has to be up to us to really talk about these things and then really put our money where our mouth is, because at the end of the day, it doesn't seem like this system will change unless we start really supporting the farmers and ranchers actually doing this the right way.
That's what's gotten us into this mess within the global food system. We don't really have a system that's set up to promote like the closed loop regenerative system, because we have a food system that's it's foundationally set up on this idea of feeding the world, but also doing that so that it's like a strategic chess piece for the U.S. Ryan, welcome back.
It's good to be here.
Wow.
Last time you've been on episode 244.
Where we're at now?
We're at 396 right now. Yeah, we've got 2 weeks till 400, which is crazy. So,
yeah, it's pretty incredible how fast time goes, man. And for the listener, we'll link to your first episode because you have one of the most compelling stories, if not the most compelling stories that we've ever heard. But we wanted to just have you on the podcast just to kind of chop it up a little bit. As of today, the day of recording, we're 88 days into the Trump administration and MAHA. And when we release this episode, it'll be 100 days in. So I just felt like with everything you're doing with the Regenaissance, literally being like the mouthpiece and the microphone to ranchers and being so involved in the food system and just kind of like sifting through the bullshit, frankly, that's what I feel like a lot of your presence is on social media. You know, I think it makes sense for the three of us to chop it up for the listener, because there's just, there's so many sound bites and things that are thrown into the ether, but it's hard to distill, what's been done, what's the truth, what's good, what's the bad. And the three of us have obviously been pretty closely tuned in, so I think it'll be a really cool podcast.
Yeah, no, absolutely, as I should say. But it's wild, just these, it's only, like you said, 88 days, and
yes,
there is so much that it's like every single day I refresh, and there's just an insane amount going on.
Yes.
So thank you for having me, and I'm glad we're having this because it is really hard for the consumer to really try to understand everything, even just in the context of, say, the HHS secretary.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, thank you. What
have you been paying most close attention to during these first, 88 days, 100 days? What stories have you been following? What do you think is kind of like the most relevant things for people to be paying attention to?
So the one thing is really paying attention to Brooke Rollins, the Secretary of Ag, because, it's part of politics. They're amping everything up, making all these XYZ promises, and you don't know if that's going to happen. I was kind of going into this assuming that none of the things would happen just because that's how the government does. But especially with agriculture, because the previous Secretary of Ag, Tom Vasilik, was not good at all. Neither was the Biden administration. And so the first thing that they talked about was eggs. That was the biggest talking point from Trump and all of them, the prices of eggs, because that just skyrocketed. And they did do that to where the price of eggs have definitely reduced. But the means to do that, I don't really agree with. So they imported a lot of eggs from Turkey and South Korea. And so that off the bat is problematic for me because we're America. We have 330 million people. The land size of this country is huge. Why can we not have any programs to really start education around like backyard chickens? Because you think about World War II, if you just Google victory gardens, 40% of all of our produce in America is grown from our backyard gardens for the war. But if we could just use that, but that was never brought up at all. And then they talked about vaccines. Fortunately, at the beginning, it seemed like that they were going to push actual vaccines on all of chicken and poultry for the bird flu. But then she realized that a lot of the research was inconclusive. So that was promising. But the biggest thing is just the transparency aspect of everything. So they're talking a lot, but then it's hard to figure out why they made the decisions or if it's even working. Like, for example, they stopped this deal with essentially schools and working with local farms, and I think it was around $1 billion that they cut that. And I have no idea if that's good or bad because it's hard to tell from our perspective. But at the same time, I kind of make the assumptions, are they doing that because just the money was not used correctly? And then there's another one to where they posted this a couple days ago. USDA cancels Biden-era climate slush fund, reprioritizes existing funding to farmers. And the reason why they did this is with this particular program, most of the funding was going to administration and other folks, and none of it was going to farmers. And so I'm trying to really track that, but that, again, is really hard to really see because I'm watching a lot of what Brooke Rollins says, and it just seems it's more of the same. She's just another talking head for big ag because they talk about saving farming and ranching, but it seems like every single day the feeling is she means big agriculture and more of the same because they haven't talked about regenerative agriculture really at all. Or, even just, again, backyard chickens, gardens, anything. None of this has ever been discussed, and it's just kind of mind-boggling to me. And so that's why, again, I'm glad that you guys have me on here because it's clear that it has to be upon us to really make these changes and really be collaborative and just really help in that way. So I'll leave it at that.
Cool. What's interesting when Harry asked you that question, I would say that 99.9% of attention when it comes to understanding, health and changes with the current administration are being all the spotlight is on RFK, which we'll dig into. But you didn't bring up RFK. You brought up Brooke and the Secretary of Agriculture first, which I thought was super interesting. Why talk about her first versus RFK?
Just because, to me, the root of everything goes to our food. And so that's another thing that I even tweeted this out 2 days ago. If MAHA is truly MAHA, but they leave out the farmers and ranchers as the cornerstone, as they've been doing, then it's not truly MAHA. Because so to push it back a little bit, the whole talk about right now with MAHA seems to be like the corporations and all of like Kellogg's. And so the focus is Red 40 and all these other additives and preservatives that you see in grocery stores. Where does all of that food come from? It comes from a farmer or a rancher. And so that's why they're missing the entire point. And I don't know if it's deliberate or not. To me, it seems deliberate. But that's also why, again, that it has to be up to us to really talk about these things and then really put our money where our mouth is. Because at the end of the day, it doesn't seem like this system will change unless we start really supporting the farmers and ranchers actually doing this the right way.
Yeah, you talked about the Victory Gardens too, which is super interesting because, the price of eggs almost like nearly doubled, right? That's like kind of crisis level price increases for a food that's pretty much a staple in most people's fridge. So it's one of those things where we're talking about like legitimate food security, and I think importing eggs is obviously the easy solution in this relatively new global food system. But I think if you even just like kind of like rewind the tapes a little bit and look at like how we got here, you can kind of like see, like I kind of see why you started with talking about the Secretary of Ag and like what we actually need to do. So like Earl Butz, he was the Secretary of Ag in the 60s and 70s, and he like famously said like we're going to weaponize food in almost an imperialistic way, where we're going to take food prices we're going to create like this amazing resource that we have in the U.S. soil, and we're going to turn all the food that we have into a weapon that we can then like basically just like create deals with countries and make them reliant on us. So like that's what's gotten us into this mess within the global food system is like we don't really have a system that's set up to promote like the closed loop regenerative system, because we have a food system that's it's foundationally set up on this idea of feeding the world, but also doing that so that we're like, it's like a strategic chess piece for the U.S. And so like I wonder, with that kind of being like the foundation of how we got here, like I wonder if like we're actually trying to actually unwind that, you know what I mean?
Yeah, it's tough. It's really tough. I mean, food, this is why with Regenaissance, my whole focus is food and our disconnection from it. Because when even going back to the 70s, I mean, my parents, they weren't farmers, and so they had never gone to a farm. Same for their parents. And so you pass down all of that knowledge essentially, but then also if you're disconnected as a parent and then you raise your children never going to a farm or ranch, you're just perpetuating those problems too without even realizing it. And so where we're at culturally too, why I've gone so focused on the food is, to me, again, it's still the main problem. And so as time continues on with this new administration, but yet the farmers and ranchers are still being left out, the general public still does not have a zero understanding just how bad our food system is, just how bad the situation is for farmers and ranchers, because they're getting squeezed out in every possible angle. And it's not just happening in America. To me, it's very deliberate to attack on the farmers and ranchers, because I also do a podcast. And so last week or 2 weeks ago, I had a farmer. She is an ostrich farmer in Canada, and it's a research facility, but she has ties to like COVID research through this ostrich egg, actually, with antibodies on it. And the government is trying to cull her whole entire flock. And then you look in the UK when they're trying to decimate the farmers right now with an inheritance tax, as well as all of the pasture land out in UK. They're trying to use just massive solar farms. In Hungary, some girl sent me an article with the fact that they're trying to decimate the cattle industry there with mouth and foot disease. Here was the bird flu. And so there's just these giant attacks everywhere that no one's really aware of. And the biggest problem with that is the government knows that. And the reason why they can get away with this is because there's no knowledge. And so one example I can give right now that's happening in America that's an awful case. Have you guys heard about the Maud family?
Mm-mm.
So it's I think they're either in Wyoming or South Dakota. But they're currently... their hearing is, I believe, at the end of April, and it's a couple, and they're each currently facing up to 10 years in prison with $250,000 fine. They are both were forced to get separate lawyers. They were both forced on a gag order, and then they were also told to not have any weapons. So essentially, they're being weaponized, and all of the reason for that is this fence line at part of their property that is next to the National Forest Service tree, I believe. Yeah, National Forest Service or something like that. But the thing is this fence line has been in their family for generations, and so they've never had any problems at all. They have abided by everything that the Forest Service tree wants them to do, but then because of an anonymous hunter made some complaint to where now they literally had guys in tactical gear show up to their place. And so there's not a whole lot of information going on right now, but that's because that's deliberate. And so the fact that they did nothing wrong, but because there's some dirty players, because then her name is Keely Cavello. She's doing some research, or independent journalist on this, saying how there's some ties to some billionaires and just the conservation land. And now like all of these conservation agencies too are really corrupt, because then there's also 12 ranches in, I think it's Point Reyes, California, might be getting squeezed out from another forestry service. So there's just like, we could spend hours just talking about certain cases going on constantly, and no one knows about it, and it's tragic. And because they're literally, this family they have 3 kids, I believe, all young, and they might have to face 10 years in prison for doing absolutely nothing wrong. And so that's why I'm focusing on agriculture, is the fact that they continue to be decimated on all accounts. No one is helping out, and no one is aware of anything happening. And so, yeah, it's a really tragic, but with the internet, I think that's why I say it has to be up to us, because we can definitely help out with them and push back to all that. Because there's other examples that has worked to where people push back and the government, yeah, it essentially works like that.
That's really interesting. Yeah, I think the three of us kind of have this shared thesis where it's like if we fix the food, that's like the root cause of fixing a ton of issues outside of food and nutrition. It's the root cause of everything, right? And there's almost like 2 levers to this whole thing, or layers, not levers, but like it seems like there's a strong emphasis and like a spotlight being put on these large food conglomerates, which is ultimately good. You know, banning Red 40, taking these things out of Fruit Loops, the Senate hearings that RFK is leading, like that's all great. But what you're essentially saying is, until we actually get to like the source of the soil and fix that and connect people with the ranchers and eat real food, not ultra processed food. That's the root cause to everything, because that really is the central focal point of MAHA, is it's ending childhood obesity and chronic disease. And so what the three of us we're noticing, it's like, okay, well, 63% of all calories are coming in the form of ultra processed foods. It's like we get 13 tablespoons of vegetable oil a day. You know, that's not actual food. Real food comes from God's soil to cattle, to rancher, to customer. But we're so broken from that and disconnected from that it's like, until that flywheel is established at scale, I don't know how much this stuff matters. I mean, that second level does matter, but we got to get somewhere deeper.
To me, it just seems like it's a deliberate distraction.
Deliberate distraction.
Yes. That's why I'm actively following Brooke Rollins and everything, not just because I'm talking about ag. It's just really trying to pay attention to MAHA and if there's ulterior motives or whatnot. And it definitely feels that way. But then going back to just the disconnection piece, why I focus on that so much is where I've noticed people are starting to become aware of, our food system and hearing about regenerative agriculture and, learning about chemical sprays. And so they'll start talking about it and trying to educate others. But then it's just interesting to see, because I can still see whenever they share stuff online how wrong they are. And then to me, they still haven't gone to a ranch or farm, but they just see stuff online, and then that works. But that's the same. I guess let me give an analogy on that. It's just like someone that's watched basketball for a long time, but have never actually picked up a ball and dribbled. And so you might know some things about basketball, but if you've never really played, you're really talking out of your ass a little bit. And that seems to happen a lot with our food and agriculture. Because, like, for example, glyphosate obviously is a main huge talking point right now. If we were to ban glyphosate overnight, I fully believe our food system would collapse. But most people don't realize that, and they don't understand that. But all they do is just shout, let's ban glyphosate. And not only that, a lot of people believe that these farmers and ranchers are doing that to just destroy the land. They don't understand trade-offs or the actual lifestyle of a farmer. And so whenever you've been so disconnected your whole life, I notice a lot of people are apathetic towards farmers and ranchers too. And so, I mean, there's so many reasons why I preach to shake your rancher's hand, but that's just another one for that.
I mean, in I think it was like 2 years ago, or maybe like even a year and a half ago, Sri Lanka banned glyphosate literally overnight. Their local food system, local food economies just were decimated. So it's interesting. I mean, there's just nuance, right? Do you have any, like, you were just talking about kind of like the specifics of like not really understanding, like not getting to the farms, not like the people who are impacting policy now and influencing policy now, not getting to farms. What makes you say that? Like, what are you observing? Are there people that you're talking to who are saying like, hey, these people aren't out here kind of like connecting with the ranchers, or is that just kind of your observation?
Observation, especially on Instagram, to where I'll see people that have rather large followings and they learn a couple things about agriculture and the food, but that's about it. And then they start just preaching on regenerative agriculture. And to me, it can do more harm than good, because again, going back to like glyphosate, these people will share that glyphosate's bad. They don't share why or anything. And if you ask them what photosynthesis is, there's most likely a chance they have no idea how to explain that. And so you have that, and they're telling people that have no knowledge of agriculture that glyphosate's bad. So then they start making all these demands. We need to ban glyphosate. We need to ban glyphosate. But yet they've never, both sides have not actually met the person that's spraying the glyphosate. And so this is, again, why, to me, we're just continuing to leave out the farmers and ranchers on every aspect. I don't know if it's because people just want to be armchair experts, or I don't know. I'm trying to really figure that out. And that's why I try to say to go to the farm, because then you see the actual farmer. It humanizes the farmer. And then you see their lifestyle if they have a family. And so you realize, okay, they have to do what they're due to support their family. And there's trade-offs in everything that we do. So there's definitely going to be trade-offs for farming whenever it's already a very difficult industry, especially from a financial standpoint. And once you can actually go there, visit, have these conversations, ask questions, then you really start learning. You just need to have an open ear and open heart, really, and that's why I have my podcast, because I talk to people that are on both sides. I'm really trying to understand everything, because if we just go about this siloing out an industry that's already very siloed and tell folks that have been ranching their whole lives and their dad did and their granddaddy did, and that's how they were taught, and you're just some city slicker telling them that, they're not going to listen to you at all. Not only that, they're going to despise you. And so that's why I say we have to go as very collaborative, because the stuff's very nuanced. And at the end of the day, it's our food. This is the whole reason we've gotten here as a society to where AI is so advanced, is because of food.
Yeah, and the truth is, right, we just don't know that much about Brooke Rollins yet, too. Like, I texted a few ranchers in preparation for this podcast, and I was like, what are your unbiased thoughts on her? And their consensus from the few that I texted were like, great pedigree, comes from a small agricultural town, Texas A&M, conservative think tank gal, but like we just don't know enough based on her track record what she's going to actually do. So it sounds like you have intuition around this stuff. But what I always come back to is, like we were talking about last night over the kitchen table, that 99% of Americans have never met their local rancher. So I just wonder, in that role, how could she actually incentivize change? Like, what would the connection be if you could take it from 99% to 70%? What would that look like on our our obesity rates?
Schools. We've got to, I mean, I know, so Indiana just announced they're banning soda and candy from their SNAP, and I believe that they're working with farms to, have better food. But to me, that's where it starts. Because I think about the farm I worked on a lot, and just seeing how the kids were on that farm, and that's a huge play for the parents too, because then they see the kids, and obviously parents want what's best for their children. And so to me, it's got to be built around schools and bringing out kids to farms and ranches and just having them interact with the animals and whatnot. To me, that's a good first step.
Can you imagine? Oh, go ahead.
I was going to say, can you explain that more? Just like you said, the kids on the farms, like what was that experience like, just seeing kids who are actually engaged with the food system?
One, they just loved being outside and being around just nature and animals. Two, well, because, we really are cooped up inside all day, for especially kids too. And so seeing their environments, they loved being outside, working the farmers markets, helping out. I mean, obviously doing kid things and, having crash outs and everything, but I went back last year, and that was after 2 years of being there, and we'll talk to them, and they love being out there. And it's just the connection. It's just, to me, that's why we are born for that. I don't know, we yearn to be out in nature. Why is it that whenever we want to decompress or distress from something, going out into nature, like even Zac Efron on like that Netflix series, he shared that whenever he's just burnt out from all of the movies and everything, he goes out camping for a weekend, and it just recharges us. There's something to that. And literally the ground, like barefoot on grass. I know you guys have had plenty of podcast episodes on that. And to me, it's just the best environment to raise your children. And so whenever thinking about education, being really super hands-on and all of that, it just makes a lot of sense to me. And then also, not only that, as the kids get older, they have that connection piece to the food. And so I'm just thinking big picture of all that, and that's why I go towards schools and education from that.
Yeah, you're making me think about, just in general with this administration, like what should consumers actually expect, right? Because it's like you expect the government to be able to put out the right information, but at the end of the day, it's like no one is coming to save you. You are the CEO of your own health. I even think about, I think Brooke has talked a little bit about potentially banning China from being able to buy U.S. farmland, which is super interesting. And I put a tweet out about this on X, and it got some shit, but I was essentially saying that there needs to be some type of a fund where people that have made money in different industries can essentially pool money together and actually go buy U.S. farmland, like these people that are in SaaS or Bitcoin or whatever and want that deeper connection to their food system. Like we've seen a few ranches that have took on investor dollars and have flourishing businesses, and I feel like that might be a tangible solution at the private level. I'm curious what you guys think.
Yeah, I think, I go back to like conversations with people who have been building regenerative farms, bootstrapping them the hard way through multi-generational ranches like Will Harris and Joel Salatin, and just some of those conversations, like basically just like the skill gap that we have is a massive problem when it comes to basic conventional farming versus like intensive regenerative farming. So I think that if we can like defend against like multinational organizations or other countries coming in and buying up farmland, we should. I don't know. I just don't know what that looks like. Whether it's funds buying up land and or like private groups who like one of the models that I think is super interesting is like more intentional living communities that buy up like bigger plots of land. I was talking to one of my buddies about this. There's a group doing this in Tennessee where they have a farm at the center of their community, and it kind of services just like this entire group of 200, 300 homes. And then they hire a farmer to come on and like just like grow the crops, raise the animals, things like that. And that's like their HOA fee. So I think like that's kind of interesting. There's also like a faith component to those types of communities too.
Is this different than Acts Decentralized?
I think it is, yeah.
Because I had TJ, the founder of that on my podcast, and it's an awesome, so it's 10-acre parcels.
Yeah.
And you can just do that. It's a homestead, and he hires on a ranch hand, and it's exactly like that. It's faith-based. It's awesome.
Yeah, actually, maybe it is. And I think that's a little bit more like decentralized. I do fear like the top-down approach of like applying kind of this like financier mindset towards farming and ranching. But I also think that like, I think at the end of the day, it's how do we get communities thinking about their food again? And that's tough when like there's so many food deserts. Most people are buying food from their gas station. Most people genuinely don't care where their food comes from, I think is like kind of just like the reality. So the people who do care need to like really own it.
I definitely agree, Harry, on that. So there's Mad Capital. I had them on the podcast as well, to where they do financing specifically for regenerative and organic farms. The one thing that would need to be done for that type of funding is those people need to definitely have the knowledge, because say they have these investments and they don't understand agriculture at all, and then they're not getting their money back quick or whatnot, and they start making all these demands towards the farmers without really understanding it. That's going to be very problematic, because again, this goes back to the disconnection piece, because agriculture and farming is a lot different than other businesses, weather dependent. I mean, there's just so many different variables that that person might not be aware of on top of the actual work of farming and ranching, and especially in our society right now. I mean, that's why there's hardly any ranchers or farmers to begin with. It's such a hard thing to make a living out of.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the way I see it is that the people that are most likely that would want to do this, to do the ranching work themselves, are actually like very passionate, young, first generation people that are probably transitioning from some different background to ranching. So you'd have to figure out mentorship to them. But how many people do we know, yourself included, where it's like if you had the capital to be able to go, buy a bison ranch or buy land, you would be doing that right now. You probably wouldn't be sitting here. You would actually be doing the hard work. And I think what you're saying is right about the top-down corporatization. I also think, whether it's Bitcoiners or like these intentionally minded investors where they're like, hey, I see the correlation between God to soil, and I'm not in this to make some crazy profit. It's just like I've invested in everything. I've made really good money, and U.S. soil is like the best thing that I could possibly steward my money into. And then in exchange, they get access to, cattle and beef in bulk and raw milk or whatever that looks like. But I almost see it as like pairing these young, hungry ranchers with like faith-driven investors that don't pressure them. But then you'd have to figure out how to train the first-gen people, which is, you can figure that out.
Yeah. I guess at the end of the day, it's like investors are always going to be looking for some level of return. Yeah. Like when I was working in private equity, it was like all the rave was, these sustainability funds that were like a 4 to 6% return, which is like nothing compared to the overall market. But like at the end of the day, you're going to be investing in something that makes you feel good about yourself. And I think at the end of the day, like the altruistic investing, it like looks good on paper. And I think people, for the most part, are in agreement that it's like, it's important to invest in these types of things. But like, investors are still greedy, and at the end of the day, like they're still looking for a return. So it's this thing where like I think they want to do it, but they have like this dissonance around putting money towards something that might take like 20 to 30 years to get to get like a real return out of.
Totally.
So it's like it's always just fighting that dynamic when you're talking about like pooling together large capital. What I think would be interesting is like taking a big swing, like kind of what you're talking about. It's like, can you architect something where there's multiple layers to it So it's not just food, but it's also like products and hospitality and like events happening on some of the space like that. I think you could actually like, you could make something happen
Yeah.
within like a corporation.
Yeah. And then I just wonder at the governmental level, what you could actually do. Like I wish I did more research on just like food stamp dollars and what they're allocated towards. Cause I know that's how Cali Means got popular, was talking about this like insidious relationship between Coca-Cola and how they would like strategically pressure these organizations so the food stamp dollars are being allocated towards Coke. And my assumption is that you're probably not getting food stamps to go buy real food from healthy soil from your local rancher. And I just wonder, like, what would you have to do behind the scenes to be able to make that happen? Because that would be super interesting.
I think like it would just take policymakers to like seriously grow up here and like make that happen. Like make it so that we're subsidizing the right things. Like if we're gonna have SNAP foods as like something that's being subsidized, like that's coming, that those food stamps are coming from somewhere. It's like if we just said, hey, we're not gonna allow food stamps to buy X, Y, and Z products anymore because they're not good for people, but you can go buy, 6 cartons of eggs with your food stamps. Like, I mean, that would change the game.
Yeah.
And then it's a matter, but that's the type of thing where it's like, then it's a matter of, okay, like, do we have enough people who are going to be able to like create that amount of supply? But I don't know, some of these things, like we're going to have to like cowboy some of these things, like some of these policies. Like, I really don't think, I think like some of it's going to have to be a bit of a leap of faith where it's like, yeah, a lot of these people are looking at a lot of these policies through a spreadsheet, being like, or they're fighting corporate interests. And I really do think at the end of the day, it's going to come down to people being like, you know what, like we just need to make a bet. And like, maybe it doesn't necessarily work out immediately, but maybe us making a bet stirs people to start investing more heavily in the infrastructure, the people, the resources to get more farm-like food on people's plates instead of soda.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yes. I feel like RFK actually does want to cowboy it, don't you think?
Yeah.
Yeah. I think he's just gonna he's gonna have to.
I mean, I feel like he did with his speech was it yesterday, a couple days ago on autism? I mean, the backlash has been insane. But
Actual autism.
But yeah, because he gave a speech and it was a great speech. But then I saw a lot of the backlashes just from some of the parents that have children on the spectrum. But it was just interesting to see. And I think that could be just a good segue, just talking about RFK. What do you guys think about everything so far for him?
It's a good question. I mean, it's pretty incredible just like the correlation of events that have led up to this moment too, because it's like there's a legitimate MAHA commission that Trump has signed. And like that was really like, I think in all three of our opinions, like the tipping point for the election of him.
Oh, yeah.
Him running as his third party candidate, talking about make America healthy again, deciding to align himself with Trump and like being like, oh shit, this guy's actually in Trump's ear. Oh, and by the way, he's 70 years old. He's in phenomenal shape. He's taking methylene blue. He's cooking his, Thanksgiving turkey and beef tallow. It's like, it seems like he's truly embodying that stuff. I know Trump signed the order for the MAHA commission. And I think May of 2025 this year, they're supposed to put together like an assessment for how they're actually doing, because their ultimate goal is to end chronic disease and the obesity epidemic with children. I think the obesity rate with children is 20% right now. And that statistic was 5% in 1970. So it's quadrupled since 1970. So I'm curious like what that assessment will actually look like. And then these new U.S., we're supposed to have improvements in new U.S. dietary guideline recommendations as well. So obviously with the things that he talks about from a nutrition perspective, I'm very interested to see what that looks like, because when you look at the guidelines from 1980 to now, they've definitely gotten a lot better, and there is an emphasis on single ingredient foods, but they're still limiting your saturated fat intake to 10% or less of your total calories. They are talking about heart healthy vegetable oil still. So I'm very curious to see what changes they actually make in the dietary guidelines, because that shit does matter.
1,000%. That was what I was gonna say. Is I think it's like almost too early to tell in terms of saying like good versus bad or making too many critical statements. But I do think that everything basically in this first year will come down to what they end up doing for the 2025 to 2030 food guidelines, because that is going to dictate and determine how dollars are spent and allocated going forward for SNAP, and also just generally speaking, like food products. You think about what happened once the original food pyramid was put into existence and the food guideline was put into existence, and the number of cereals, the number of processed foods, the subsidies that came after that. Like I'm pretty sure we've spent over $120 billion in subsidies for corn, soy, and wheat since the 1970s. So it's like, how much money is based on what we're talking about with these food guidelines is insane. So there's a lot of dollars at stake, and I think a lot of it comes down to like what people or what changes we decide to make with those food guidelines. So I think it's like critically important to like see like directionally, do they make any big changes? And if so, like what do they do?
Yeah.
I want to see what he does with red meat too, because that's another thing that's still so heavily demonized that people think that causes colon cancer. I mean, that's actually, it's funny. That's what, growing up, I didn't eat a whole lot of steak because I thought that too. And I'll be interested to see with that, especially with just where we're at agriculturally and with, our cattle industry, if that really changes anything either.
Yeah. What I think is cool is that from the time this MAHA wave of momentum started, public awareness around vegetable oil, methylene blue, Bitcoin, we were all at the Bitcoin conference, right? So it was very cool to see RFK actually talk about Bitcoin, and you're like, he really understands his shit. Yeah. And then, you go to White Oak Pastures, and Will and Jenny Harris are saying how, I forget if RFK went or his VP candidate went, but one of the two of them was there. He's going to ranches. Like, it seems like he's really doing the thing. So I think it all reinforces the fact that he wants to cowboy it. And I think he will try to cowboy it as hard as possible, but can he cowboy it? Like, how much does that bureaucracy actually get in the way? Like, I wish I understood more about lobbying. We should have a lobbyist on the show, too, because I'm like, all right, you want to do all this stuff and make regenerative agriculture way more replicatable. Like, how do those big four meat packers actually play into that?
Well, I know it's affected huge for agriculture because all the farmers I've spoken with to where for the MAHA Alliance, pretty much all of the farmers that we would align with that interviewed, not a single one got chosen. And so I know there's a lot of bureaucracy happening, and so that's why I also say, like, we the people is, I have no idea what's going on behind closed doors for Brooke Rollins. There's probably an insane amount of stuff. So, and that's why it's got to be up to us, especially with food, to where we've got to create the changes, share the knowledge, and just collaborate.
What would be the biggest win? What would be the biggest win at the end of 2025 for this group trying to make America healthy again, in your guys' eyes?
That's a good question.
What would be the biggest win?
This episode of the podcast is brought to you by the Regenaissance.
What about you, Harry? Do you have your answer for that?
I think some big swing in subsidies. Like, I think if we could sign some bill that just showed that our government was willing to put our money where their mouth is. Like, I'm not pro subsidy at all. I would rather the government like keep their hands away from these sorts of things, because I think subsidies have a way of just distorting these systems, and that's literally exactly what's happened. They distort the system, and then companies come in and are opportunistic and take advantage of those distortions and those things that are happening in the market. So I think that like it's going to require some level of funding to get more people aware, not just aware, but the price is down for higher quality food, more people involved from a supply side. So some like roadmap towards funding for the next 5 to 10 years that would spur more people getting involved in the regenerative food supply, that would spur more people buying and thinking about regenerative food. But I don't necessarily think that's like a long-term solution, but I do think that there will need to be some funding shift away from what we're doing right now, which I think is like, it's kind of like glyphosate, where it's such an integral part of the food system that we can't just be like, all right, subsidies off, because we would have like a catastrophe. But I do think that we need to start like having some sort of like secession plan away from this like death machine that we've built.
Yep. Because at least for the farmers too, once they're in that, it's hard to get out.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess for me to add on to that would be going back to the schooling, and with the potential seeing that Indiana is trying to work out some program with working with schools in farming.
I like this answer.
If we can do something with that, because that's one thing I've been looking into, just the history of agriculture in America. Even seeing like pamphlets in the 1910s and 1920s on backyard chickens and gardens, like it's pretty apparent that throughout a lot of our history in America, they were educating the public a lot with different pamphlets and whatnot, and going back to the victory gardens. That's completely stopped. So if we can do something like that, like around nationwide in relation to the schools, I think that would be pretty sweet to see.
Yeah, I think what was it? Arizona public schools officially banned ultra processed food. I think it's at the state level too. I'll have to fact check that, but I think some type of a national ban for ultra processed foods for public schools around the country would be pretty incredible. And then I think other things too. Could we go from 1% of all Americans knowing they're meeting their rancher to 10%? What does that look like? That's a ton of Americans. Could we shift ultra processed food consumption of 63% maybe down to like 40% or something like that too?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think I really like the idea of just like I think at like the educational level, we have a massive issue and a massive shift needs to occur. So like if we are talking about that secession plan of like shifting the dynamics of the food system, just getting young kids involved and excited about these these programs and just thinking about their food in a way that's more intimate than just going to the grocery store and picking up something off the shelf. Like, I think that would be a game changer. We were talking to our buddy Trevor Gibbs, who we had on the podcast. He's founder of Man Bar. Shout out Man Bar. And
Yes.
He was talking about just like these schools that are popping up all over around Austin. And they're these like privately funded schools that I guess are doing a lot more hands-on type work. And they do like some homeschooling and then some schooling in the classroom. But they'll do much more like experiential type stuff, teaching kids how to like change tires, teaching kids how to raise their own food, teaching kids entrepreneurship and just basic business stuff. And yeah, I feel like that like independent minded person wants to know where their food is coming from. So even if we're not necessarily teaching kids, here's how to raise an egg, I want you to like become a farmer when you're older. We are teaching them that there's an important character trait of just being independently minded and thinking for yourself and wanting to know where your food is coming from.
That's why I go at it from that angle too, is the fact that I know for a fact there's so many people out there that they just don't have the awareness of agriculture as a whole, and to where, they're living a very unfulfilled life. They might have a good paying job and they might have, a good city, but they're still missing that really inner fulfillment aspect. And with going at it from just education and schools and kids is the fact that, like, just what you said, Harry, is a great point. So going on as they get older, might go to college and whatnot, they still might have that knowledge in the background to where thinking about what they want to do with their life. And so the fact that if we could just try to have that as a viable option, there'd be so many more people in agriculture. It's just lacking in the awareness and education and community, really.
Yeah, you guys are making me think too, because I really have a hard time believing that this information will ever get disseminated at public schools. And the natural solution is like for more of these private schools like you're talking about to pop up. But again, it comes back to, the more I'm talking about it, like the onus really is on us versus the government, right? So like as I'm listening to this, I would think that it would be motivating, where it's like, I think the model is make money however you can, whether that's online, whatever, and then take that money and then like funnel it back into the local community, right? So it's like we literally have to be empowered to make money so we can go do good with that and start more of these private schools.
Yeah. Yeah, I think just like the willingness to like start something too. Like I think that there's a lot of examples of people like Jason Rick, first generational, people like Kevin Munoz, first generation rancher. Like these guys are quite literally cowboying it and going all in. And I think that there's something to that. There's something to be drawn from that. It's inspiring, and the risks that they're taking, it's not just like financial, it's lifestyle. It's so much deeper than just, deciding to go start a garden. Like they literally have their financial means for their entire family tied up in what they're doing. So, it's a big bet, but I think that when you take a multi-generational view on things, or you just take the long time horizon view on things, like it's a great bet to take. And I just hope that, even in my own life, like I hope that more people see that and are like, okay, that's a lifestyle that I can model, that there's a lot of meaning behind, and it might not come with glamorous things like super nice car or the ability to take crazy vacations, but it does come with like putting down roots and having a great family and all these great things. So I just think that like there's like a cultural shift that really kind of needs to happen away from the current thing.
Yep.
So, I mean, I think that's like what we all talk about.
I mean, that's above all else.
Basis.
Why do people, whenever they're sharing online about the trad life, it's always pictures of like a mom with her kids looking out in the field, or just a whole family together? There's a lot of truth to that. And that's why whenever I think about the farm I worked on every single day, seeing that family, you, again, might not have that fancy car, but the fulfillment is being on the land with your family. To me, that's life. I mean, if you go back to my last podcast with you guys, I share about all my family stuff. At the end of the day, it's really your family. Yeah, I'll leave it at that, because it's just crazy what the experience is like being on a farm. It leaves me speechless. That's why I'm trying to think about how I can even express that, but it's really hard to, unless you've never experienced it for yourself. And it's really not that hard to visit a farm or ranch. Like, we have outsourced responsibility for everything. And so it's just like, how can we get a farm? We have a supercomputer in our hands. You can literally just Google farm near me, call them up. It's not that hard. It might be intimidating at first, but we really it takes 5 minutes to even just find a farm or something like that. And that's another thing that's kind of annoying me is I'm glad you mentioned the government aspect of it's coming to save us, or no one's coming to save us. That's true for this. It's never been easier to use the internet and just find things, but we're just so accustomed to not doing that anymore. And so we just expect everything to come our way and be just easy.
Yeah. I think the best thing the government could do in this situation is just propagating the right information, so that you then feel empowered to actually like pick up your phone and call your rancher, who would be absolutely delighted to hear from you too. And then you build a relationship with that person. But the root cause of all this stuff, like you're talking about the feeling that you have being out at a farm in nature, the root cause of all this is like what I hope happens the most during this administration is honestly just like a spiritual revival towards the Lord. Because that's where this all flows from, right? It's like God to soil to cattle to rancher to customer. It's all from God.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's actually really interesting too, because I was reading this the other day about this resurgence of priests and just like the priesthood. Like there's a lot of young conservative priests like basically coming into this, into the church. And I feel like that movement and like this like rancher movement are kind of like both gaining a little bit of traction and attention at the same time. And I think that's a clear indication to what you're talking about, of like a spiritual revival, like people realizing that there's so much meaningless stuff out there that we should take basically the full 180 reverse view and like return to something that is like truly meaningful and valuable.
There's a lot of talk about shepherds in the Bible. Could be something to that. Could be some connection.
Could be.
Potentially.
Grass is greener on the other side potentially, and that's your pasture land.
Yeah. Yeah, but it's like if you're disconnected from God, your proclivity towards thinking, your definition of food is essentially like anything that's consumable. Whereas if you take a biblical stance where it's like these single ingredient things that are talked about, it's like you're almost forced to connect with your rancher, right? Because that's the only way you can access those like real single ingredient foods that will heal you and nourish you and make you feel incredible.
Yeah. Yeah. And you just take, like I was saying earlier, you take a multi-generational view on everything. So you're like, how are my great grandkids going to be eating? I don't want them eating a pill and just being like zapped of their connection to the soil.
Yes.
And yeah, like scripturally speaking, like we're like God breathed life into the dirt and created man. Like we come from the dirt and we go back to the dirt. And I think at the end of the day, like there's something beautiful and powerful in that. And like, we are supposed to be working with our hands. We are supposed to be doing these things that like working the soil is like, I think it's like part of our innate being and the meaning behind like what we're supposed to be doing. So I would love to see a return to all of it.
Little Jesus revolution
2.0.
What do you guys think about before we wrap? Pepsi seems like they've snatched up a bunch of these healthier, better for you companies, Simple Mills, Poppy, Lesser
Siete, right?
Evil, Siete as well. There have been like 4 big ones in the last couple months. And I do think there's this tendency to immediately demonize that. And I think the truth is definitely a little bit more nuanced. There's definitely pros and cons to it, but I'm just curious what you guys think.
I'll let you go, Harry.
I think what I would like to see is that big food companies stop trying to build healthy brands or stop trying to build brands in general from the ground up, and they just place bets on the brands that ultimately show to be the most viable. And I think health brands over the next 10 years, like healthier for you brands, are going to 100% of the time be the best bets to take. That's like what people are reaching for. They're not reaching for a tastier version. They're not reaching for like, I guess cost is one thing, but it's like they're reaching for the healthiest version. And so I think it's cool to be able to see big food investing in innovation from the perspective of them buying companies instead of like them just trying to do the work themselves. So I think it's a mixed feeling of being hopeful that it changes the culture of these big food companies, but also realizing that like there's a lot of like marketing charades that can happen that once they get bought by a big food company, they can start changing ingredients and making things less healthy and still have the brand label. But I think that big food and these companies like can only get away with that for so long, and eventually like the culture has to change. And I also think that like people in general are realizing and waking up that like these products need to exist. And so I just think that I have more faith in the idea that like people who are working at these big food companies, like they're just either going to leave if they care enough about the health movement, or they're going to like be wanting to make the change. It was kind of goes back to like our conversation with Jacob Donahue the other week, where he was talking about being an entrepreneur within a corporate company. And I don't know, I'm probably idealistic in the way I'm thinking about it, but it's like, I just think that people who care about this stuff will get into those companies and eventually just like start to make the change happen, and like continue the ethos of some of these brands forward.
My mind has changed over time on this because, like Mark Sisson, he sold Primal Kitchen, and fortunately, in the clause he had to where nothing can be messed with. And to this day, I've not noticed anything, seen the ingredients, no issues. I'm pretty sure that's what Siete did, something similar. And so my hope, I agree with what you said, Harry, a lot on that, is one, the good thing is more and more people are getting fed up and being more outspoken. So if they were to change things, say like with the Siete, my hope would be that people would speak out. And so they would realize, that would hurt their bottom dollar and they would change, kind of like what happened with Bud Light. Two, I do not fault the family that founded Siete, because I think they sold it for $1.2 or $1.5 billion. So that's 1,000,000,000,000,000,000. You expect people to not take that? That is tough. So I think just how the reality of nature is, who's going to buy that? Just these bigger companies that have the cash like Pepsi. And so if we want to drive better, healthier snack brands, I'm kind of on board with that, as long as they don't mess with the ingredients, because I know that does happen a lot. Like it was, I think, Boulder Canyon chips. I'm starting to notice some of their chip ingredients have all kinds of canola oil blends and like all these other preservatives now. So if stuff like that happens, I really hope that people would notice and drive that change. But time will tell, and I don't know. I'm hopeful too, like with you, Harry, on that.
Yeah, I think time will tell. Right, a lot of this is still a newer space of these larger food conglomerates that are buying better for you things. I think we're all on the same page where it's like, how do you not have sympathy or happiness for the founder? Like we've met the husband and wife behind Poppy and the Siete family, and it's like they've literally given their whole lives to these businesses. It's like they should be rewarded for putting out an amazing product.
Yeah.
I also think it's encouraging too that it's like they're buying these brands because they're an economically viable option for that business. Like that's a sign that as consumers, we can actually drive demand so much that these big food conglomerates actually want to buy them too. I think what's tough is that we have emotional bias because these big food companies have done so much harm. We're kind of like, fuck them, that's a bad thing.
Yeah.
But like, as Harry is saying, if you get these entrepreneurs that then end up getting on the board of a PepsiCo or a Nestle and they have sway, fuck, dude, it could take one person culturally to like change an entire company. And that might be super idealistic, but it's like, what is if you don't think that's a good thing, what do you think is the best thing?
Exactly.
Should we just blow up these companies? Like, we're not going to. They're like multi-billion-dollar entities. We're not going to do that. So we might as well try and get them to change from the inside out.
Yeah, I agree. There's and there's a lot of influence with the bigger companies too, right? Like, you know, if they made a big bet on regenerative agriculture, it would have a massive impact.
Yes.
And I think that's way more possible than like the government making a big bet on regenerative right now. Like I would much prefer to see like PepsiCo or, you know, some of these other big food companies placing that bet, because it would mean that there's like economic viability behind it, and consumers actually want this stuff and we can make money on it. Like, that makes way more sense.
Yes.
I've been trying to get in contact with Maker's Mark because they're fully
Really?
regenerative. All of their
Maker's
whiskey.
Mark, the whiskey?
Yes. All of the wheat they use is certified organic regenerative.
Really?
Yeah.
I would have never guessed that.
It's
Maybe
awesome.
a little
So-
sponsor for Regenaissance.
Dude,
Potentially.
that would be huge.
Yeah.
Wow.
That's so interesting. Also, dude, I love the fact that like my mom is just going to go to like big box retail stores, like because of the distribution of some of these companies. Like my mom is buying Primal Kitchen stuff at ShopRite or Target. Like, it's so cool as a kid to be able to see your parents making those changes. Because as we've talked about, parents are the hardest to make these swaps, and like the distribution of large companies, like, you know, it's legit. And so I think this stuff is a lot more nuanced. And then the other thing too is, was it Steak and Shake that they were switching to beef tallow and then they got shit because the fries were like pre-fried in seed oils or canola oil or something
Vegetable
like
oil.
that?
Yeah. Steak and Shake messed up because they promoted it as it was fully 100% tallow. So I don't know why they did that. I don't know if they expected no one to ever actually dig into the fries or whatnot. But yeah, there's a rule that you can fry certain products for up to 10 seconds in vegetable oil and not be on the ingredient list. Because I learned that through Purdue Chicken. A lot of their breaded chicken that's even like gluten-free, I learned that there's vegetable oils in it. But you go in the package, it doesn't say anything.
Yeah. But again, I even wonder too, like, are we being overly critical? Like the fact that they're
I don't
even
think so.
thinking about beef tallow, like that's fucking awesome in my opinion.
We need to be overly critical like that stuff, because then that does drive the change, because Steak and Shake eventually owned up to it. And I think they are making the changes. But also this goes back to where, as a consumer, especially when we're talking about farmers and ranchers, have to really understand where they're coming from and really educate. Because then if we start making all these demands, say with like glyphosate, but don't understand their situation at all, you're really you are making the problem worse.
Yeah, I think it's really important for us as like citizen journalists, or like whatever you want to call like our cohort of people who are just like kind of mouthpieces for what's happening, is like call balls and strikes, but also be able to recognize like this is good, this is bad. Like the fact that beef tallow is in fryers at Steak and Shake is massive. Imagine 5 years ago if they had come out with that announcement, like 100% of people, 99% of people would have been like, "What's beef tallow?"
Yes.
So we've
I
come
would have been one
that
of
far in that period of time.
Yes, that's my point. Because you have these people that are like, "Oh, you fucking, you know, big food shill," and I'm like, dude, like you said, it takes time. It's literally brick by brick. These things that we dreamed about on X when we all started posting and consuming content on X in 2021, 2022, they're literally coming to fruition. I think my problem is that I'm getting so disenfranchised with the health and wellness content creation space in general.
It's terrible.
Like when you see Paul Saladino go into Hop Dottie, who he's friends with, and they did this whole menu switch where they release like 13 regenerative menu items, and then he holds a camera up in there and is like shitting on them for cooking with vegetable oil before they move to 0 Acre Farms. It's just like, dude, you're such a like, it's so, it just drives me insane, dude.
Yep, absolutely.
So I think that's where I'm a little bit disenfranchised. Where it's like we're pushing the ball in the right direction. Like this stuff is going to take multiple decades, probably.
I mean, you brought up Earl Butts. That's from the 70s, and we're being affected by
Yes.
that. Like, it takes decades and decades and decades.
To unwind.
That's why I'm telling people that it's good you're becoming aware, but then we have to sit down, have a piece of humble pie, and really educate ourselves and try to understand what's going on. Because if we want these changes for our food, we got to be thinking about the future generations, like what you guys are saying, because this goes back to we expect everything immediate. With Ozempic, we expect to just lose weight all of a sudden and not face any repercussions. Like, this stuff takes a very long time to change.
Yeah, I think a lot of it ties back to a massive misunderstanding of the nature of change, and just when it comes to these institutional changes that need to happen, it took us, as Ryan points out, over 50 plus years to get into this mess of where 90% of people are metabolically unhealthy. It didn't happen overnight. It took 50 years. So in order to reverse it, maybe times it by 2. It might take more time because it's a multi-generational problem.
Yes.
Like, we need the change to happen at the habitual level of end consumers, and also people willing to take risks, personal risks, to break down and deconstruct what's already existing. Like, that's going to take time.
The last point I want to add, even with that too, going back to Steak and Shake, because people were going all in arms too with tallow. They probably expect all these places to have fully grass-fed and finished, regeneratively raised tallow. But then you've got to understand that we have the lowest cattle inventory since the 50s, even dating back to the late 40s. And then let's say we add 100,000 cows overnight. Great. We've got to wait 2 years. Most people have no idea that you have to have that full waiting period if we want grass-fed and finished. And so that's just one of many examples to where you have to really think about the time preference of everything.
Yeah. I think to summarize, right, it's like there's a lot of great work that's being done. Quantum leaps the last few months. There's still a lot of stuff to be desired, but ultimately, like, it's on you and having conversations openly like this and literally like one small piece at a time and just falling in love with that process. And what does that look like over the course of 10, 20 years if we all just push ourselves to have conversations like this and do the difficult things and literally just build in this country. That's what America is. That we're a country of builders. And I don't know. I just think the best is ahead.
It kind of ties back to our conversation earlier in the day at our Bible study. Like, we just need more laborers. Like, we need people who are like literally willing to do the work. So yeah, I think that's like kind of the message is like, if you want to see the change happen, get involved, and don't just let being like a consumer who is voting with their dollar be your end game. Like, that's fine. That's like gonna help, but be part of the actual practical solution. Like, start something that ends up shifting us further in the right direction.
Yeah.
That's what I think, like, it's all comes down to like creating our way out of this.
Well said, brother. Ryan, what do you have coming up on the horizon, and where can people connect with you?
Yeah. So I've mentioned quite a bit that I have a podcast. So I'm doing a lot of that. A lot of media. If you go to my Instagram and Twitter, I'm going to be on TikTok too, and then doing more YouTube. Is just doing a lot of podcasting with farmers and ranchers and other folks in the ag space to, hear their stories, the actual farming and ranching, but then there's just so much that goes into the world of agriculture. So really just painting that picture. So doing a lot of that. And then lastly, I have some cool things planned for the second half of this year. I might as well just share it. Come July, I'm going to be on the road for 6 months and visiting farms and ranches, doing a lot of more in-person podcasting, but then also educational farm tours and just all kinds of things with that. So I'm really excited for that because it's pretty clear that, we've had this whole conversation on that. It's just pretty clear that this is needed because people are starting to wake up, but there's a lot that needs to be shared. So thank y'all for having me.
Yeah, man. Just grateful for you as a friend. Also just grateful that there's people like you that are like you're actually doing the hard work and, going to be traveling around the country and being the voice to a lot of these ranchers. And we've talked to multiple ranchers that talk about the work that you're doing, and we've seen it behind the scenes. And you're incredibly supportive to us. And yeah, man, we don't have to make this like a monthly thing or a quarterly thing. I think it's a pretty cool concept. But thank you, man.
The last thing I'll say is Raw's Law.
Raw's Law.
Right.